in this case, we're going to do a higher key background, which means that your background and your tabletop are all a very light value. And in this kind of composition, or this kind of value structure, you want to make sure that your subject matter has more to do with darker values or darker value colors. Not to say that you can't have anything white in there or anything light, but you already have your light giver. So I say in every painting you want to make sure you have a light, a color, a dark value, and a dull or desaturated value in every composition. So instead of toning too dark today, or toning with just the umbers, I'm using yellow ochre and a little touch of my raw umber just to neutralize a bit of the heat of the yellow ochre. And putting this on with my medium Merige, as you can see, not toning too dark and not getting this too wet either, because I do want to be able to pick and choose when I put some thicker white paint on top of that. But this will be a nice warmth. I do want to do kind of a cool against warm. So the cooler ginger jar against like a warmer white background. And I recently did a presentation all about backgrounds. And so if you haven't seen that yet, check out the Q&A and lectures section on our website. And that will really help you understand value structures, color themes, how those two tie together, and how that affects your background choice. All right, so the other thing is that this is a triangle shaped composition. I've nestled basically all of my objects together here in sort of a triangular type shape. I added in the pink flowers to get the height of this triangle, and then we've got the jar here. We know the jar is going to be a dark against light. I just put a little more raw umber in this to get the value a little bit darker than what's in the background, but not too runny, not too wet, let's say, and not too thick also, so that the other thicker paint will sit on top. And then I just want to mass in also the shape of the orange. But basically all of these elements are set up in sort of this right triangle type shape, okay? If you want to do, shadow on your white background, obviously you can. What you have to keep in mind is that the starting edge of the ginger jar must be a slight bit darker in value than the background, even if you have shadow back there. So for me today, I'm just going to do, really no shadow on the background, just kind of a flat, light background across. And I'm actually kind of making my jar a little more substantial in size than what it is, in reality, because nobody's going to see, except for you guys, of course, what the proportions in real life actually look like. Just using a little more raw umber here for some of the shadow playing, just to get that even darker value change sort of figured out. Not even using a lot of medium at this stage also, just because there's already enough down. It may not look like it because everything's really dry to the touch, but you don't need a ton of medium. All right, so make sure that you go for proportions that look good in your actual painting, not just copying what you see up there in front of you, because it's not always the best. So I do love the angle of this little orange here. And so I want to make sure to pick up on that angle and that gesture so I don't end up just with like a perfectly round ball. Flat on the bottom, taking rounder on top, taking this cast shadow back into distance. We get a little layer of light back behind the cast shadow as well. As far as the cast shadow from the ginger jar goes, I can choose to use it or not. It's very hard to see right now at the angle I'm at, so it may not be really that purposeful. Same thing too with the folds in the cloth. That will be something later on that I will decide whether or not it can play a role or not in the painting. So again, don't just copy what you have up there in your still life. Definitely if you see a fold and it is not serving the composition, you know, meaning it's taking the eye out of the painting or just too much of a distraction that's not needed, don't put it in. All right, so we've got our basic size and placement here, and I'm not going to put in the table edge either. You could also say kind of push this up and back if you wanted to as well. If that's what you wanted to do. I'm also not going, you notice I don't have blackout on my palette today. So because I'm doing a higher key background, you really don't need to push your values that deep and dark, you know, even in the foreground. I would say, you know, nothing's really going to go darker in value than say this raw umber on a high key painting. It tends to, this still has enough value contrast, and if I do push these darks too dark, let's say to black, what can tend to happen is it just looks out of sync, you know, maybe looks too much of a jolt. And yeah, so I just took black off the palette altogether. All right, I'm just going to clean this up. Now, of course, this is one of those times that I'm going to use my Phthalo Green Cool. You can purchase this either, I mean, you could purchase it from anybody really, but Sennelier makes a Phthalo Green Cool. That's on our Dick Blick supply list. And then Mamiri Puro calls theirs Cupic Green Deep. Okay. But that is like the perfect color for this jar. So we're going to start with that. And I'm just going to start with it pure in the shadow, just mixing in with the raw umber. Might actually add a little burnt umber. Just give it a little warmth there. And already I can kind of curve this shape to get more of the drawing of the ginger jar. I love the fact that these ginger jars have, or this jar has, these really strong plane changes, you know, starts and stops on the form. That's going to also kind of, I'm pretty much just seeing two planes out of this 6-sided object. Might also just kind of delineate like where's that green glaze going to kind of stop and turn into a different color. Now for the green and light, I need to add something to make it look lit up. I'm going to start with Naples Yellow Light. As you can see, that lightens it quite a bit, but I can't just use a straight pigment because it's too dark and transparent of a pigment. I need to keep rich color, but also add in something opaque because opacity looks like light in painting. So let's see, this ought to do it. Maybe a little yellow ochre since it's going a bit minty. And where you want to test, of course, is on the starting edge. So we just kind of want to start with an overall color, fill in the shape, you know, not fill it in loosely, you know, make sure nothing ever looks like you cut it out and pasted it on. That's part of becoming more painterly as well, which I know is so many of your desires. So many of you desire to get a more painterly look, and one sort of requirement for getting more of a painterly look is not to you know, go for accuracy all the time or precision. You're going more for general shapes, let's say. All right, and then right in the center, of course, we have this beautiful highlight. I'm just going to go ahead and put on some white here. And again, use your highlights or anything that you can to pull out more of the form of the object. So there's like this beautiful curve here on the top of the jar. And I'm also starting to see some of that kind of terracotta stone that's underneath the glaze shimmering through. And this is kind of where I can use the palette knife to start to bring in some of the texture. You know, because it's a clay pot, there is sort of this bumpiness to the texture. And then we've got a second highlight up here. All right. Then you can start to indicate, I'm going to do some yellow ochre, some cab red light, and I'm also going to use the green just to kind of knock down the saturation a bit. Then you can start to look for some of the details once you have a basic color, some of the changes in that color. And again, with details, I always say focus in the light first. Oh, that was a happy accident. Focus in the light first, and then specifically on the center of the form first, working your way out from there. All right, let's grab some more of this ochre. We need more ochre, cab red light, add the green in there. Maybe needs a little Naples yellow light to get it a little bit lighter and a little bit cooler, since Naples yellow light does have more of a coolness to it. And then down here we get more of this terracotta color. Again, go for a big shape first. What's the value of that shape? What is the hue? Is it red, yellow, or blue? Which color family does it belong to? And then what's the saturation level? Is it more of a desaturated color? So those are the three things you look at when you're color mixing. What is the primary color hue that color belongs to in the primary color family? What is the value of that color? Is it dark? Is it light? Is it somewhere in the middle? What is the saturation level, meaning how pure is that color? So my purest colors in this painting are really with the orange. And I actually decided ahead of time that I'm not thrilled with how much red orange is on this orange. I'm gonna, I think just for color harmony's sake, push it a little more to the yellow orange rather than the red orange. But for example, the local color of the ginger jar is very saturated. The color of the orange is very saturated. And then other things that are desaturated, very few things actually, would be the background and the terracotta. So you really do want to look at all the saturation levels in your entire painting to make sure that you're keeping track of that as you're, painting in some of these more subtle mixtures. All right, and then just like on the jar, we want to start with that highlight on the front center. Whoops, make sure it's high enough up. Think about the equator line, that halfway sort of equator on the object. In this case, since it's tilted, the axis is this way. So anything below this halfway line can get a little bit darker. The highlight always goes above that, as in most cases well, I lost my train of thought. Let's see. What was I going to say? Oh, our light is almost always above. All right, and then we've got a little bit darker version of that terracotta color in the shadow. I don't want to, make too much fuss about that, but I do want to show that there is a change on this side. The only edges I really want to make sure are super sharp are here, where that plane definitely makes an abrupt shift. If you want to do a little more here, right now the paint's super wet, so you may want to wait and let the paint set up a little bit. But for example, we've got these little ridges of light and little color changes like this. The green goes a little lighter here on that edge, and then also some pieces. over here, but you don't need to give us an entire outline. Just suggest little bits and pieces here and there. And try not just always mixing color on your palette. Try to let some of the color, mix wet into wet on the painting. Now on top of this jar, we get a lot of this really great dusting kind of stuff. Changes color, gets a little more desaturated on this top plane. Make sure your brush strokes, try to take your brush strokes with the form as well. Shorter strokes across the form, curving with the shape of whatever that form is. And then let's not forget to get a little touch of that terracotta up top. Again, you can make a long stroke like that, but then come back and kind of shorten it up a bit. This is an ellipse on the opening here, so on this side does get a little bit more cool light. On this side, I'm going to add in a little more red. Let's do some burnt umber, and then I've got this kind of mass-in color, which was just sort of a dark, and we're going to get this effect of the cast shadow. I'm just going to push some of that light over. Use your brush to push and pull paint around where you want it to go if you don't want to just paint on top of that color. If that's not quite reading dark enough, maybe a little more burnt umber to get the effect of that cast shadow. Now, I do think one last thing, hang out on your star of the show long enough. And as I said, in this case, my background color is really, my background value that I started with is pretty close to what I'm going to end up with. So I can hang out here a little bit more because this value relationship is close to accurate. And then, say after you feel like you get enough attention to detail on this, then move into the surrounding area. But I always say start with your star of the show first and spend a good amount of time there, as much time as you feel is warranted. There's a little cast shadow after this little ridge of light, just to show that we've got raised and lowered edges, this kind of carving that's on here. So you want to look for tiny little shadows that might show up. Now, before I paint the flowers, I'm going to go ahead and put in some background color. And I guess before I even do that, I'm going to put in some suggestion of this orange peel, which is bringing in a slightly different color. I'm going to add some Naples yellow light to that orange mixture. And that might be the only thing that goes as close to the white of my background, still being a slight bit darker. But this is really something that's added in just for a little extra visual interest. In every composition you need a good variety of shapes and sizes. You need some fine things to really, if it's all just big objects, it kind of feels like something is missing. So I'm going to add some red with my cab red light with my phthalo green to get shadow color. That's going to give me a nice harmonious shadow color. Again, always looking for ways to tie the colors together in the painting. And that's going to take that shadow a little bit darker. All right, I'm going to clean this up here. Now, I already decided beforehand that I wanted the ginger jar to be a cooler dark against like a warmer white in the background. Bear with me just a second. So I know that most of my background, I'm just going to use all this white, all of it. Let's just get it all going. And I'm going to now I want more white, right? Especially because I need to control a little bit more of my edges, get more contrast around my edges. So for example, you know, I'm going to start with like my thickest amount of paint, say here. And as you can see, the value is pretty much the same. One thing to keep in mind about your massens and your starts is that you're trying to set up the value structure in that massen and start. And then as you go into color, you want to try to hold to that value structure because that was your big idea. So start with the thickest amount of paint first around the star of the show. Then you can say, you know, get all that out of your brush, and maybe it can get a little duller and less lit up as it moves away from the subject matter. I'm going to need a whole heck of a lot more white for this. Now I do prefer a lead white, which is what I was just using, but since this is going to take a lot of white, I'm going to switch to a titanium. Because as you know, the Kremnitz white and all of that is a lot more expensive. But I don't like to switch to titanium altogether unless I'm doing maybe plein air, and even then, when I'm painting my foreground, I'll usually have two whites out for plein air. One, you know, the titanium for the sky and the lighter colors, and one for the color mixing, because the lead white is just so much more softer in tinting strength, so it's a bit of a jolt to try to switch. All right, so just to maybe go a little bit darker around the edges, see how much that titanium white just bleaches out all the local color. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just it takes getting used to. So a lot of times people ask me, why do my whites look so chalky? And I think titanium white is a big contributor to that chalkiness. So try to warm up your titanium white if you're using it. As you can see up here, it looks really icy, maybe really chalky. But get kind of a thin layer of this white down to work into to get rid of your massen lines. You know, then you can go darker if you want to. Like over here, maybe I want to go, you know, maybe I can go a little bit darker and it still read as a high key painting. Tabletop plane. I'm going to put a little cad yellow deep in this around, say, where my orange is. And this is really where I want to start going for some thicker application. Because, again, what's in front, maybe I'll go even warmer. What's in front, you know, we want thicker paint, more basically. So we still want some variety of thin versus thick. So you can still paint, you know, a higher key background and still do thin versus thick. And as you can see, the yellow ochre that I toned in with is just kind of a warm, glowy tone. So if any of that shows through, it's not going to look, you know, muddy or anything like that. It's just going to kind of have some of this glow. Might even put in a little more just pure yellow ochre. This is an edge, an area maybe where we need a little more contrast. And then what you want to keep in mind is when you're doing high key, that all that light is hitting the background and just bouncing all over the place into your side planes, your underneath planes, because the white is underneath, the shadow planes, you know. So for example, you want to, you know, let's say on this side plane, I do want it has a little more kind of a golden yellow peachiness to the side plane reflection here. It's still, you know, a bit darker than the light back behind, but you do want to get a suggestion of that of that light moving about. And then of course I do have some beautiful reflection and glow from the orange itself into the side plane of the ginger jar, as well as, you know, something a little bit lighter, especially since this is such a strong glaze, shiny glaze. But right along, let's say the back edges is a really good spot to try to get a little bit of that glow in there. Okay, and then the underplanes, as I mentioned, because you've got light on the tabletop plane, you want to make sure to get that glow of light, right? You're still concerned with effects of light here. Glow of light. And then I can use the green and the orange together to create sort of a neutral transition color here. It might even move to kind of a violet. Yeah. Now finishing this, you know, just getting more attention to detail, cleaning up edges, you know, making sharper edges where I need the eye to focus more. Softer edges to communicate more atmosphere in the piece. So sharper edges where you have overlaps. All right, and then last but not least, let's get in, hang on just a second. Last but not least, let's get in some flower color. Oops, I picked up kind of some cruddy stuff there. And again, even in the background, to get a false white, use the green with the yellow-orange to make sure that you integrate all the colors, even in the whites. But they have to be very close in value. Now, I want to kind of get rid of some of this umbery stuff, so I'm going to take background color and just kind of paint over it, paint right over it for now. And then I can paint the green and the pink on top. I thought the pink was sort of a wild card, nuanced color that really, I think just maybe is a touch odd with the color combination, but is sort of a welcome, something that's different, that's welcome. So now in this case, you could break out, let's say your, you could break out, you know, a quinacridone magenta, something like that. I'm just going to use my alizarin crimson. This will be the closest I can get to the actual color of that sort of hot pink flower with this palette. And again, you have to just decide what matters to you. Do you want to exactly copy that, or are you, you know, satisfied with getting as close as you can? I've taught classes before where people, you know, a color like that, you kind of need whatever that exact color is, that exact pigment, and they don't have it, and then they get very frustrated thinking, oh, I don't know how to mix color. And I try to explain to them, no, you can't mix that color. That's kind of one of those colors that is not really mixable. You need the exact pigment. So, but sadly they kind of beat themselves up thinking, oh, I must just not know how to mix color. All right, so again, this needs to be darker than the background. And I always like to paint the flowers first and then do, you know, the green bits. This one goes a little bit lighter. Maybe we've got a little, I don't know what those are, the center things. All right, and then going back to the phthalo green cool with the cad yellow, and maybe I'll go ahead and throw some pink in there. Again, I just always try to relate all the colors in the painting. Now you could either do this with a palette knife or with your brush. I usually start with my brush first, and then I'll, where I need some finer or more specific things, I'll use a palette knife. But I like that there's this little leaf here. Start the stroke at the end that is showing up more. Usually on flowers and leaves, it's where it's against the background. And then look at the gesture of the leaf. Pull it inward, curling your, curving your stroke as you're doing that.